Welcome to our webinar today, Accelerate Your Sustainability Strategy with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. My name is Nick Lund, and I'm on the leadership team for ASCM San Diego Eco-Sustainability Group, and I focus on finding knowledgeable professionals like Eileen to keep us informed on sustainability best practices. I'd like to introduce you to Eileen Daspro, who holds a doctorate in business administration and is the Director of International Business at the Knaus School of Business at University of San Diego, where she teaches in the undergraduate and MBA programs on international business, social innovation, social enterprise, and global strategy. She is a NASBITE certified global business professional and holds a certificate in social impact consulting from Georgetown University. Today, she will be presenting on the UN's blueprint to achieve a more sustainable and better future for all. This webinar will address how firms can create action plans to embed these goals into firm strategy and operations. Please enter any Q&A questions in our Q&A section on Zoom, and questions will be answered at the end. I'd like to hand it over to Eileen.
Thank you. So this is goal 12, which is ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns. And you can see one of the targets that's associated with goal SDG number 12 is to encourage companies, especially large and transnational companies, to adopt sustainable practices and to integrate sustainability information into their reporting cycle. So there's a number of more specific targets aligned with every one of the 17 SDGs. So that makes them really actionable for organizations. And then in addition are included a number of different indicators or KPIs by which countries or organizations can measure their progress towards attainment of the SDGs. I chose this one specific because it's particularly relevant for firms, but basically the number of companies that are publishing sustainability reports, which is a topic I'm going to talk about a little bit later on in the presentation. So, a concrete KPI associated with the indicator, with the target, and then of course, a number of targets associated with the overarching goal. And again, emphasizing that the SDG framework, the United Nations Sustainable Development Framework, its purpose was to articulate an international blueprint by which we could achieve a better and more sustainable future for all, not only for countries, but as well as for organizations, and to kind of judge our progress towards meeting that goal for 2030. So one thing that is, I think, interesting for you to think a little bit about in terms of this framework is just what areas, what themes do these 17 SDGs cover? And they're really aligned with what I would argue are the 5 pillars of the United Nations in terms of sustainability: people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnerships. And if you kind of classify all of the different 17 sustainable development goals, they all align with those 5 areas of people, prosperity, planet, peace, and partnership. So they're broad in terms of focus, and they all align with those kind of core principles that are really considered the foundation for a more equitable and sustainable world for future generations. So one issue I wanted to address with all of you is the issue of intersectionality. And this is going to come up a little bit later on in the webinar about the importance of, when companies are embedding this into their strategy, the importance of prioritization and which SDGs are you going to embed in your strategy. And it's important to understand that when you really delve into the 17 SDGs and their targets and associated indicators, they're all dependent upon one another. There's clear linkages between all of them. So, for example, effective action on climate change, which is one SDG, is essential to achieving strong economic growth and sustainable cities, which are 2 other SDGs, right? Or, for example, better quality education, which is an SDG in itself, is also essential to productive employment and reducing poverty. Again, 2 other SDGs. So while it's going to be important a bit later in terms of strategy formulation to prioritize SDGs, we can't ignore the fact that they're all linked. They're all related to one another. That doesn't in any way mean that you shouldn't engage in an exercise of prioritization, but it's important the fact that given the nature of sustainability and its interdisciplinary nature, all of the different SDGs depend upon and also impact others. So just to give you a little bit of a kind of a historical perspective of where these SDGs came from, and as I mentioned earlier, really the distinctive characteristic of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as they were articulated in 2016 is that they were really an invitation set forth by the United Nations to the world, but explicitly to the business community to come to the table to engage in solution making focused on sustainability. So if we look at kind of from a historical perspective, attitudes of business towards sustainability, a couple of decades ago, we were focused primarily on making money, and then maybe a greater focus on engaging in corporate philanthropy. 3 or 4 decades ago, the importance of corporate social responsibility and companies being better corporate citizens, making sure they're operating within the confines of the law and compliance and kind of mitigating risk in terms of their reputation. That kind of evolves towards stakeholder capitalism and the importance of the responsibilities that companies have to all of their stakeholder constituencies. And most recently, and this is really the foundation of the UN SDGs in terms of its attitudes towards business, is this notion of shared value. And this is a strategy concept articulated by Michael Porter from Harvard Business School. And basically his notion of shared value is that there are business practices that can enhance the competitiveness of a company, that can create economic and financial value for the company at the same time that they can advance economic and social community conditions in society or in communities. So it's not an either or. So essentially the bottom line is that it's good business, right, to care about sustainability. That's the notion of kind of shared value. And so really what the SDGs embrace is this potential for businesses to explore what are the ways that they can create shared value through their sustainability initiatives. So this is just the Secretary General at the time when he publicly announced the UN SDGs, really inviting the private sector to play a role and saying, business is a vital part in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, and really a public recognition that the government, the public sector, and civil society could not do this themselves. The number and the magnitude of the sustainability challenges that we faced in 2016, that we currently face in 2024, are too many and too great for those two sectors alone to address them effectively, that they needed the private sector to engage in addressing these sustainable development goals. So that's a really important, I would say, milestone in terms of our attitudes of the business community and their engagement in terms of sustainability initiatives. So when these were first articulated back in 2016, there was actually some research done on this by the Business and Sustainable Development Commission that tried to quantify this, to try to get the private sector on board, to get the business community on board and say, listen, this is how much, talking about shared value, what is the economic value? What is the financial value that the SDGs, that sustainability initiatives could represent for your firms? And they were able to articulate approximately $12 trillion in market opportunities related to quality education and health and responsible production, et cetera, and approximately 380 million jobs. So this was essentially they're creating a business case for the SDGs, right? They're trying to show them through numbers that in effect there's share value that has been untapped by pursuing some of these SDGs. So here are, again, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And you might be wondering, of these different goals, which are the ones that have embedded the greatest market opportunities? Like, where's that $12 trillion opportunity lie in these 17 goals? And so this is, basing back to their research again, They focused on a couple of SDGs specifically where the greatest market opportunities lie. Again, so if we're going to drive home the business case for firms that there is money to be made, there's important cost efficiencies to be realized as a result of sustainability initiatives. They are in great part in the industries of food and agriculture, urbanization, and sustainable cities, energy use, and more responsible material use, sustainable materials, and health and well-being. Now, that's not to say that the other sustainable development goals don't have, cost efficiencies or market opportunities associated with them. Nearly all of them do. But these were the ones that are kind of like the largest fruit to be gained, so to speak, by the business community in terms of aligning their business strategy or embedding sustainability within their business strategy. This is probably a little bit hard for you all to see, but you can see this is kind of they take all of the 169 SDG targets. So there's 17 goals and then 169 targets that are more specific, right? And they looked at all of these targets and they basically match, how much do these targets that were articulated by the United Nations align with the business opportunities that the Business Commission had identified. And there were many of them. There was significant overlap between the business opportunities and the proposed SDG targets. So this notion that through the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, we could create shared value, and there's an opportunity to both create economic value as well as promote sustainability was realistic. Okay, so just again justifying the role of business in sustainability strategy. So I want to take a minute right now and a couple years ago, we passed the kind of midway mark towards 2030. 2030 is our milestone for the United Nations in terms of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. How are we doing? How much progress are we making? These, after all, are sustainability indicators. So we need to track our progress. So let me share with you a little bit about how we're doing as a country, the US, and also how we're doing kind of globally as well. So first things first, I wanted to share with you this research from KPMG, which I thought was fascinating, since a lot of what I'm going to be talking about a little bit later is on reporting and reporting on using an SDG framework. This is really, really significant. So just over from the research period, which was from 2017 to 2022, look at how much more companies are reporting on the SDGs than they were a couple of years ago, right? So in KPMG's research, they were looking at two different kinds of companies. So like Fortune 500 global companies, that's the G250, and then the N100, which were companies that are kind of national companies, which could have international operations, but they were more more domestic in their focus. And so you can see here that SDG reporting has increased markedly, right? So if you look at, I'm going to focus in on the G250. So from 43% in 2017 to 74% in 2022. So that is incredible. The amount of just the recognition of that there's this universal framework and that people should incorporate this framework into the reporting is really significant. Now the N100, right, which are companies that are headquartered in their domestic markets, the progress was not as significant, but still quite significant in terms of the amount of companies that are reporting. So more stronger reporting among the large multinational firms that might perhaps face more significant pressure by different stakeholder groups to engage in this reporting. But across the board, the reporting has increased significantly. And that's really important to understand because it's a validation of the fact that the global business community recognizes this framework exists, and that's important to incorporate it into their strategy. I also wanted to share with you, I thought was really interesting from the same report from KPMG, who's reporting by industry. So this is again from the same period, 2017 to 2022. And you can see that there's some variation in reporting by industry, right? So not all industries are reporting to the same degree. So we've got, telecommunications industry, tech 86% of 250 companies are reporting on the SDGs in comparison to only maybe 67% of healthcare firms. I wish I had the explanation behind that. I don't know why that's the case. Perhaps it's because the telecommunications, the tech companies have more financial resources to engage in sustainability initiatives. Or I'm not sure what the reason is behind this, but it is important to identify that it's not uniform. So while there has been across the board greater reporting in SDGs, it's not uniform across industries. And in some cases, that variation is quite significant, right? So if we want to have a uniform framework, we need all industries actors to be engaging and reporting, of course, utilizing this framework, not specific industries. Another point that I think you'll find really interesting, and I would argue is a really important area of opportunity in terms of the SDGs, is what they're reporting on. So, in terms of UN Sustainable Development Goal reporting, it's not the ideal would be reporting on SDGs where your firm can create a positive impact and also mitigate a potential negative impact. So you can see here, for example, on the screen, this example from Maersk. This is from one of an old sustainability report from them. I think it's from 2017, where they've kind of articulated both. These are the SDGs where Maersk can have a positive impact, and they've also articulated some of those goals where they need to mitigate a potential negative impact. So the importance of reporting on both the positive as well as mitigating the negative and recognizing the negative in your reporting. So there's a lot to be done here, as you can see. Not only do we have a lot of companies that are still not reporting, it's really the minority of companies that are reporting on both the positive and the negative. Those firms that are reporting, which is a good step in the right direction, right, are mostly reporting only on the positive and not being transparent about the potential negative impacts as well. And transparent reporting would require reporting on both elements that are aligned with the SDGs, not only the opportunities for positive impact. So that's an important area of opportunity for improved reporting. Now, the other issue I wanted to address with you in terms of reporting has to do with prioritization, right? So there are 17 SDGs and there's 169 targets, and there's just too many for any company to realistically, despite their intersectionality, there's no way a company could, focus on all of them, even though that there's relation between them. So which ones are companies prioritizing? Like, what have we seen so far? So basically what we've learned, or most of the literature on this topic talks about kind of cherry picking. Firms are trying to prioritize. Usually you'll see companies focus on maybe like 3, 4, 5. That seems to be kind of the sweet spot. And you can see here, there are not all of the SDGs are being equally addressed. So these are they all have targets for the same year of 2030. And while the business community has embraced them for the most part, at least in specific industries, they're overwhelmingly choosing the same SDGs. So you can see, for example, the ones that are most frequently chosen here: number 8, decent work and economic growth; number 12, responsible consumption and production; and 13, climate action. So that's great for those SDGs, but what about the other 14, right? And really concerning zero hunger, which is obviously incredibly important, poverty, life on land, peace, these are under recognized and under prioritized by firms. And there's concern about why they're not being addressed. And so some of the critique of firm adoption of the SDGs has been levied at the fact that, right now in these still relatively early stages of the UN SDG adoption, maybe not so early, but in terms of sustainability, maybe reporting, is that firms are focusing on those SDGs where they have a clear business case for their adoption, where they clearly impact positively their bottom line, right? So whether it be, decent work and economic growth, focusing on, creating jobs, or responsible consumption and production, focused on reducing waste, or in climate action, again, important initiatives focus on greenhouse gas emissions. These are specific policies and programs that you can clearly make a business case for many companies and many industries. So it's easy to incorporate them into your reporting because there's an opportunity for you to realize important cost efficiencies or even market opportunities. So it's not difficult to make a case for them. Others, it's not so clear. How is our firm, our consumer goods company going to focus on no poverty or zero hunger or life on land or peace? Like, what's our firm's role in addressing those SDGs? So while it is important to prioritize SDGs, firms should not be focusing on all of them. It's just too much. It's too ambitious. They should prioritize. There is some concern that if business plays such an important role in achieving these, there's a whole section of the SDGs that are just being ignored by the business community. And that's, that creates some concern that firms are cherry picking those SDGs where they can show clear progress and not tackling the ones that are perhaps the most challenging. So a little bit on kind of a global perspective of where we're at, and then we'll shift a little bit to the methodology. So real quick, I'll go through this. This is from 2023. So kind of coming out of the pandemic, where are we? How much are we on track for 2030? So this is globally. 15% of countries globally were on track, and 15% of the indicators. That's, I guess, good news in the sense that there's some that are on track, but it's a woefully low number. 48% are moderately or severely off track, and 37% of them stagnated completely. I think one important, that's, concerning, and I should mention that the pandemic was not helpful in this regard. So there was important progress that were made, and some of the SDGs related to health, related to education, related to poverty, related to hunger, which lost ground during the pandemic. So they were already ambitious targets to begin with, and we're now playing catch up because of the challenges associated with the pandemic. We do have a universal framework, though. We have an internationally agreed upon framework and methodology, and that's the first step. So that's good news. And as I mentioned before, the other good piece of news is that companies are reporting on them. They're incorporating them into their reporting. How they report on them, I'll be a little bit more critical of that in a couple of moments. But again, the fact that we have a framework and that it's been universally embraced, and that companies are increasingly using the language of sustainability that's articulated by the UN SDGs, that's an important first step. Okay, so here's kind of our progress to date. This is just showing you kind of visually the progress that's been made so far. So, some of the SDGs we're making a lot of progress on, others we're making not much progress on at all. The ones that we're doing relatively better on, higher, more green would be kind of in terms of clean energy, responsible production and consumption. Again, I think those that we've made a little bit more progress on are ones where we can make maybe a stronger business case for them. And ones that we, are making less progress on or even losing ground, hunger, education, among others. So again, it's not uniform across the Sustainable Development Goals. And again, that concern, the fact that not all of the SDGs are being prioritized, or in some cases, none of them are being prioritized by firms or industries. Here's our country rankings. You might be curious about how the US is doing. US is not in the top 10 in terms of their progress towards achieving the SDGs. This is probably not a surprise for any of you that the Nordic countries, Northern European countries, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, kind of dominate the rankings in terms of their progress towards the goals, because traditionally these countries have placed a high priority on the role of government and kind of achieving social objectives. And the United States is ranked, in case you were wondering, it's ranked 46, which is unfortunate, I would argue, considering the size of the US economy and its potential for impact in the SDGs. There isn't really any SDG of the 17. This is as of 2024. So these links that I've included for you, they're great. The tracking of the UN SDGs is phenomenal at the country level, at the actual indicator level. There's a lot of really readily available data on how we're doing, which has really improved the reporting process. But the US is ranked 46 here in the world in terms of their achievement of the SDG goals, which, remember, these are uniform goals for all countries. And we haven't achieved any of them yet. And some important weak areas, specifically in terms of hunger, climate action, peace, partnerships, responsible production. So a lot still to be done in the United States specifically. Okay. So that's kind of the first part of my webinar. I want to talk a little bit of background in terms of where the SDGs came from and why they're important, and the role of business in achieving these ambitious goals for 2030. Now I want to take the second part of the webinar to talk a little bit about how all of you can embed the SDGs in your sustainability strategies for your respective firms. And so what role do they have in terms of strategy formulation? So I'm going to share with you a number of different tools. In some cases, I'll give you the link. Sometimes I'll give you a screenshot of kind of what it looks like, but there is really a plethora of resources out there to help integrate the UN Sustainable Development Goals into your sustainability reporting. So I encourage you to use these. I'm not going to be able to, for sake of time, I won't be able to show you all of them, but I'll talk to you a little bit about what they could be used for in different steps of the process. So the first step I think all of you should reflect upon in terms of sustainability strategy is, taking a couple of steps back to this notion of shared value, right? That principle of shared value and how firms can create economic value and also create value for society kind of simultaneously. So I'd say the first step in the creation of sustainability strategy is an assessment of where does that overlap lie, right? Where are the opportunities where our firm can make a strong kind of business case for embedding sustainability in our strategy? So this is a really great resource, is the SDG Compass. This was created by the GRI, the UNGC, and it basically is what I'm going to be presenting in the next couple of slides. It's just an overview, kind of step-by-step of how to embed sustainable development goals into your strategy, and I encourage you to use it. They have just a wealth of resources for this process. And so the step number one is to understand the sustainable development goals, and specifically which goals present opportunities as well as responsibilities for your firm in terms of shared value creation. Okay, and here's where I think you can. I think this is a helpful resource. This is a framework developed by McKinsey. It's called the Sustainability Compass, and basically what they've articulated is, and this isn't exhaustive, but there is a minimum of at least 12 areas whereby companies can create economic value by pursuing the sustainable development goals. So let me tell, and the first step for your firm is to identify where are those opportunities for shared value creation. So for example, one of them, if we look at, organizational performance, one possibility would be, hey, if I embed the SDGs into company strategy, I'll be able to attract, maintain, and develop the best talent, right? Have the best talent, highly qualified, and inclusive workforce. So that's one kind of really strong business case for employing the SDGs. Another one is in terms of risk management, right? So if you integrate the Sustainable Development Goal principles throughout your operations, you'll be better poised to mitigate risks in terms legal risks, reputational risk, operational risk, et cetera. So kind of the business case for more comprehensive management of risk. And then there are opportunities for growth, right? We can create new products and services that are sustainability minded or incorporate sustainable packaging. There's an opportunity to introduce new products and new revenue streams focused on sustainability. And then lastly, the opportunities that are inherent in a greater return on capital, right? So for example, if we think about the possibility of, if we use our resources more efficiently in terms of water, in terms of energy, more sustainable management of our supply chain, we can improve the return on our capital. And that would make a strong kind of bottom line argument for adopting the SDGs. So I'd say the first step is looking at your value chain and where are your opportunities for creating shared value. That's step number one. This is just some examples. I'm going to kind of breeze through these for the sake of time. The second one is to define your priorities. So you can't address all 17 or all 169 targets. So where you prioritize, and some guidelines here for prioritization. So I would say what's critical here is to map your areas of impact. And as I mentioned earlier, the importance of mapping both the positive as well as the negative, because there's definitely a tendency to map only the opportunities of positive and just ignore the negative. So, this is an example from a firm, their value chain here, and they've identified some possibilities where, listen, through our work with our suppliers, we can, for example, minimize our negative impact in terms of water use and sanitation, or there's an opportunity for positive impact in our own company's operations by creating better work or more favorable work conditions. Okay, so mapping out your value chain and identifying potential areas of overlap between the SDGs and areas of positive as well as negative impact. That's a really important input in terms of prioritization, right? Where those SDGs align with our core activities in our value chain. And then here's just an example. This is from Iberdrola, a European energy company, but you can see how they've done this. This is part of like the training materials from the United Nations, but they show you an example of how companies are doing this, right? So certainly as a multinational company, they address all of the SDGs in different capacities, but this is what they're focusing on. As an energy company, they're focused on energy and climate action, and they're kind of prioritizing these 4 other SDGs. So the importance of prioritization, I think, is a critical element in strategy formulation. And that requires identifying those issues that are of greatest materiality to your stakeholder groups, right? So again, 17 SDGs, 169 potential targets. How do you identify which ones you want to focus in on? And the goal here is really those that are of highest materiality, right? So those that have a potential impact on our business directly, right? There's a robust business case for those in terms of cost efficiencies or attracting greater talent or new revenue streams in terms of more sustainable products and services. But in addition, those issues are the issues that our stakeholders care most about. Like those are the issues that they want us to address, whether those be our employees, our investors, the community, et cetera. So an important, I would say, compass for you in terms of identifying which SDGs to prioritize is to engage in a materiality assessment. What are those issues that our stakeholder groups want us to focus in on after post-mapping your value chain? So this one's a little bit hard to see, but I'll point out what you need to be able to visualize from it. This is from another energy company, Enel. But basically what they've done is this is the product of their materiality mapping. So basically they've consulted all of their different stakeholder groups, the community, customers, investors, the media, their suppliers, employees, et cetera. And then they've identified a host of different issues related to the UN SDGs, okay, related to employment and kind of consumer safety, et cetera, et cetera. And they've quantified basically what are those issues that are most significant, that matter most, which are most material to their different stakeholder groups. And then this becomes an important input for the development of their SDG strategy. We're going to focus in on those SDGs that are aligned with the issues that our stakeholders care most about. Okay, so prioritization involves identifying those areas of positive and negative impact of greatest relevance to your value chain, but also of greatest relevance to your stakeholder contingencies. Okay, and then thirdly, you need to choose your indicators. So what are you going to use? Which indicators are you going to use to assess your progress on the SDGs? So the SDGs, there's a number of different resources you can use for this. The actual SDGs themselves have a number of indicators associated with them, KPIs that you can utilize. Some of them more focused on kind of country level reporting. Others are more focused on company level reporting, similar to the one I just shared with you earlier. You may want to take a look at this link, this business indicators link. It actually aligns the UN SDGs with a number of different business indicators that can be incorporated into company level reporting, specifically those indicators associated with the GRI. So this is great. Like it's already matching for you the SDGs and then the indicators that are commonly utilized by the GRI. So you can kind of merge your kind of reporting standards. You need to set your goals. Your goals need to be specific. They need to be measurable. They need to be time bound. They need to be public. They need to be communicated regularly, and your progress towards those goals and challenges faced. So again, the importance of reporting on the negative as well. I'm thinking about a couple years ago, like a chocolate manufacturer had one of their sustainability goals focused on not employing any forced labor, any slave labor, et cetera. And it had been uncovered during their fiscal year that they did not, in fact, meet that challenge. And they were transparent about that in their reporting. I mean, that, there's obviously risks associated with that, but they were reporting not only on the positive, but in the negative, where they also fell short and why they fell short, and shared that narrative of where they fell short. An element related to goal setting, I would argue, is also integrating the sustainability goals into performance reviews and kind of remuneration schemes as well, like how we're going to incentivize progress towards achieving these goals. So here's an example. Take a look at I want you guys to just all to see this reporting, because this is excellent example of reporting. Look at all of the KPIs, okay? Notice the target. This is at the time the target was 2020, but you can see a clear target for 2020. And notice, again, a quantifiable KPI and clear reporting on progress by this firm, PulseGuard, on how the progress towards attaining that target. That's excellent reporting. You've got a clear benchmark here, you have a clear target KPI, and you're tracking progress towards that goal every single year, okay? Which is important in terms of transparency of communication. And then step number 4 would be integrating your sustainability into your operations, right? So, okay, we've identified our SDGs. We've identified which ones are to prioritize, and we've identified key KPIs associated with this SDGs. Now, how are you going to incorporate those sustainability initiatives into our core business and embed those targets into company functions towards achieving these goals? And for this, I would really welcome and really invite all of you to take a look at the SDG Action Manager. This is a great tool. Again, I think one of the benefits of the reporting framework is that there's just so many tools to kind of help you incorporate this into strategy. Moral of the story, the easy part is choosing an SDG or communicating an SDG. The hard part is actually implementing them, right? The hard part is execution. And so this Action Manager tool is focused on that specifically. And so it takes some time to work through, but essentially it's a self-assessment tool for firms and collaborators within the same organization. So multiple people can work on a single assessment at the same time to evaluate their progress on key initiatives aligned with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So it's a great kind of like your kind of an assessment or audit of where we stand now, and what specific policies, business models, and initiatives could we have in place to improve our progress in achieving sustainable development goals or key KPIs associated with the SDGs. So it's fantastic. It's a fantastic tool. It's also a great tool for benchmarking. It provides some guidelines by industry, so you get an idea of what is a reasonable standard for a specific industry as well. So a great tool in terms of kind of operationalizing the KPIs. And I would say an example of that to just share with all of you would be this example. So this is this fictitious firm identified that one of their SDGs that they wanted to work on was SDG number 12, right? So this is responsible production and responsible consumption, KPI 12. And so their specific, that's the SDG, and their KPIs are focused on phasing out harmful chemicals by 2020, and ensuring that all harmful chemicals alternatives are identified for any harmful chemicals that are specifically being used, okay? So they're their specific KPIs. And then they've identified what areas of within the organization are going to embed those KPIs in their day-to-day activity. So there's work for the R&D department in identifying alternative materials for existing harmful chemicals that might be used. And the individual who's responsible for that, working towards that or kind of leading that initiative. And then in kind of the supply chain management area, identifying, phasing out all harmful chemicals and products that they might be currently purchasing from other suppliers. And again, that's the role of the purchasing department. So this is just to give you a quick glimpse of what this would look like in terms of embedding some of these KPIs within the actual operations of an organization. All right, so to kind of wrap things up, is the last step is kind of the reporting and the communicating on these. So it's critically important to report and communicate on the SDGs and your associated KPIs regularly. As I mentioned before, they are an internationally recognized standard. So I think one of the challenges we face in the sustainability realm is that there's so many different frameworks, right? There's so many different frameworks that utilize different standards, that utilize different metrics. And the UN SDGs is an internationally recognized standard. So that's in itself makes it attractive in terms of decision making, right? And also in terms of the quality of communication. The importance of reporting on the positive as well as the negative. And then, of course, reporting on the actual policies and practice that operationalize the SDGs, not just including the SDG icons, which is something I'm going to talk about right now. So I find this slide fascinating, at the same time discouraging. I guess it depends about how you look at the positive or the negative. So this slide is a little dated. This is from PwC from 2019. So perhaps there's been a little bit of progress on this, but not much from what I've seen. Basically, what the companies are really good at incorporating the sustainable development goals into their reporting, like including the logos, including the icons, choosing a couple of them. But good SDG reporting requires clear KPIs that are linked to the SDGs. They're regularly measuring progress. They're reporting on the positive, reporting on the negative, et cetera. And they have a clear, they're clearly time bound with a benchmark, year of initiation. Only about 23% of companies are doing that. That's our end post. Like, that's what we're looking for, right? It's not about, we know the framework exists. It's probably a good idea to include some of these logos in our sustainability reports, our impact reports, our annual reports, but we also need to align our reporting and our operations with these. That's about 20% of firms. So there's still a lot of work to be done there to integrate these more comprehensively. And then lastly, just to kind of wrap up, I wanted to show you a couple of examples of companies that I think are doing this relatively well. Dynon does a pretty good job with this. This is just some screenshots from their integrated report. So you can see here, Dynon has chosen 6 different SDGs that they're going to focus in on. They've kind of prioritized their sustainability strategy in 3 different areas. This is kind of, focusing on people and, planet, et cetera. So kind of aligning them with the 5 Ps of prosperity. But this is where you clearly see an example here of prioritization and specific operations, programs, and policies that are aligned to these priorities. But look at the reporting. I think they do quite a good job with the reporting. So they've identified here goals, okay, clear goals along these 3 areas of impact. So this is preservation of regenerative nature. They have a clear goal. They have a time-bound KPI, okay? Some of them are 2030, 2050, 2025, et cetera. They're all quantifiable, right? 0, 10%, 1.5, whatever. They're all quantifiable. And every year, they're tracking their progress towards achieving that goal. So that level of transparency is really what is the best practice. And they do that across the board, not only for nature, but for food, and also for people. Again, goal, time-bound, regular tracking and reporting, quantifiable KPI, and reporting on progress to the goal every single year, okay? And then I think just lastly, to wrap things up, here's some other examples of companies that you might want to check out that do, I would say, a good job at reporting. I'm sure I've left out others, but all of these multinational companies incorporate SDGs into the reporting to different degrees. So worthy of checking out and kind of comparing how comprehensive is their SDG reporting. And then just to kind of wrap up, some final words on this topic. I do think the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are a positive development in terms of sustainability. They represent a universal framework for sustainability. As I mentioned, they explicitly invite the business community to embed sustainability into their business strategy to create shared value. That's a really important focus, a strategic change for the UN SDGs, their invitation to the business community to be part of the solution. We're increasingly seeing companies recognize the SDGs, adopt the SDGs as a framework. Again, that's good. But not necessarily operationalizing them, like what specifically projects, initiatives, and metrics that are aligned with them specifically. There's an opportunity to do that better, right? That's that 22, 23% statistics I shared with you earlier. Effective SDG reporting would mean that the SDGs are prioritized, they're measured, they're tracked, and they're communicated regularly. And they're linked to specific business policies and programs, and they report on the positive and negative. And so that's a lot to ask, but that's what it would mean to use them well, for them to be an effectively embedded into sustainability strategies. So there's some work to be done on that. And then lastly, I just felt I had to say something about, how are we going to ramp this up? Or what are some possibilities to improve upon this? And so, governments can play a role here. We need more incentives to firms to adopt the SDGs and also to improve their reporting on SDGs. And so different stakeholder groups can exercise, provide either incentives, or encouragement in this regard. Governments can play a role. We're seeing, examples from the EU, from maybe the state of California, et cetera, that incentivize or even require firms to participate in some level of SDG reporting, and that shows some potential promise for the future. So with that, I will end my presentation and open things up for Q&A.
Thank you, Eileen. So we do have a question from Chris Peters. Chris, are you able to elaborate on your question about how a topic was covered? And in the meantime, I'll ask a question that I had kind of towards the end. It seems like a lot of companies are not in a great place in their reporting. Seeing these SDG reports year over year, do you think companies are expanding their capacity to report properly, adding on each year? Or do you think that those companies have stagnated and just doing how well they are?
Yeah, I think it's, there's so many different frameworks for reporting, and in many cases, companies will choose a reporting framework that's where they look the best, right? That's most suitable for their own reporting practice. I'd say it's encouraging that they are adopted the framework and they understand the importance of this. You have to include this. There's an expectation on the part of your stakeholder groups that you incorporate this framework in your reporting. But effective reporting, again, is what's lacking. And that effective reporting is, again, quantifiable, time-bound KPIs, where you track progress yearly towards an established milestone. I have to be honest with you, it was even tricky for me to come up with examples for you for today for the webinar of like, this is a great example of how it could look. Because a lot of companies, obviously, that level of transparency, that's a high level of transparency for firms to engage in terms of reporting. And that's where I think there's an opportunity for significant improvement.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can see how as companies progress, they want to be more transparent as they do better. So there's kind of not a great incentive there to be transparent at the start. All right, so Chris did elaborate on his question. He is asking about the chocolate company.
Oh.
Yeah, do you see that being non-compliant with slave and forced labor?
How is that uncovered? Oh, I don't know if I know how it was uncovered. I mean, if it was uncovered by a third party, like an NGO or something, versus the company. I don't know the backstory. This was with Tony's Chocolonely, which is a company that's regularly hailed for their sustainability initiatives. But and it came out in their reporting, I think from last year, was in their 2023 or their 2022 report. But I have to be honest with you, I still use this example when I'm teaching as an example of like that level of transparency. I mean, the language in the report is like, we fell short. Like, this is what we had, and we discovered this about our particular supplier working with, and And so we can't say that. I think they had declared that they were 100% slave free in terms of their, cacao production, et cetera. And in fact, they were not. And so, while there's risk associated with that, that's the level of transparency that's required. It's reporting on not only the strides that are made, but also the challenges that companies face. It's not all, there are obstacles along the way. And I think that level of transparency creates important gains for the firm in terms of their own reputation and the value of their brand.
Thank you, Eileen. Looks like we have a couple more chats coming in. Excellent presentation. Would love to attend a semester-long elaborated version of the 1-hour presentation. I agree. There's definitely a lot to cover. And then he does have a question in the chat.
Well, I would say, Dustin, in terms of broadening the conversation, I think, working off what I just said, we don't hear enough of those examples of the challenges, right? So, it's clear that there's, that we can make a relatively robust business case for adopting sustainability in the UN SDGs. What about the challenges? What about the challenges, like where companies are not able to incorporate this into their practice, or they're not able to convince constituencies to adopt this framework, or, they fall short? I think we learn as much from the failures as their successes, but the reality is that they're not as widely reported on. But I would think that would add a lot of value in the conversation, Dustin, to be honest with you. What are the challenges that firms have faced in terms of adopting sustainability in their strategy?
I do have another question in the
Sure.
meantime. Do you have any advice for small to medium-sized companies that might have a struggle dedicating resources towards SDG reporting or sustainability reporting?
Yeah, start small. Right? So start small. So, even just a couple of KPIs. I actually do, this is the area where I'm doing a lot of work right now, is with small and medium-sized businesses, diverse founders, et cetera, that are interested in kind of adopting sustainability reporting or creating an impact report. And they don't have, they haven't defined which goals. They don't have defined metrics. But in many cases, they do have the data. But they don't have it centralized in a single location. So while there are a number of different softwares and platforms you can use that may be too costly for a small, medium-sized business to adopt, that to facilitate reporting, a handful of KPIs of data that you can clearly track. That's an excellent first start, right? And then track those on a regular basis. And I would say are ideally something that is within the realm of your own company's operations to track. So something that you don't depend upon a supplier or distributor or someone outside your immediate firm in terms of measurement. Not because it's not desirable, it is. It's just probably going to be too ambitious. And so what are you able to track yourself? And a simple Excel sheet with a couple of KPIs that you measure on a regular basis. That's an excellent start.
Awesome. Thank you. That's a very helpful answer. It looks like Dustin does have a follow-up question about how we can bring more people into the conversation. He says, for example, sustainability skeptics who have decision-making authority and or other types of influence in organizations and in society.
Yeah, I almost feel that I think this is where the UN SDGs really offer a lot of promise, because I'm a business school professor. So when I articulate this with my MBA students, for example, we spent a lot of time talking about how this notion of shared value, right? It's not just the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do for society. It's also the right thing to do for your bottom line. And so focusing on some of the clear business case associated with the sustainability. There are all of the different market opportunities, all of the different cost efficiencies, all of the opportunities to enhance organizational performance. That kind of goes back to that sustainability compass from McKinsey. Not that you need to limit yourself to those, right? But in terms of trying to engage a naysayer or getting them on board, there's a clearly articulated and documented business case for a number of these initiatives. And so I would say starting with the low-hanging fruit, where you can show possibility for economic value as well as an opportunity for creating social value as well.
Thank you, Dustin and Eileen, for that answer. Thank you so much, Eileen. That was a very informative webinar, and thank you everyone for attending. Our next scheduled webinar is in early September, Tuesday, September 10th, and we will have several professionals coming to speak on green building and LEED. So we'll send out more information in August.